See, we don't just honor God and love our neighbor through acts of charity. Everybody understands how we honor God and love our neighbor through acts of charity.
Yep.
I would say we don't always, but we can honor God and love our neighbor through acts of commerce as well. And that's not just for this little, this country over on the Indian Ocean.
Right.
That's right in your own neighborhood, your own backyard. You
everywhere.
can honor God and love your neighbor through acts of commerce, just like you can love God and love your neighbor through acts of charity.
We are back for another episode of the Missional Marketplace podcast, accelerating the Great Commission through the marketplace.
That's it.
Like we say, that's what we're about. That's what this podcast is for. And that's what we hope to encourage people in, is that their work matters.
That's right. To encourage believers in the marketplace that who you are and how God made you is part of God's kingdom mission and plan for this world. Marketplace believers are not B-team believers. They are a key component and a sacred component of what God is up to in this world today.
I love it. You've been called up to the A-team.
That's
Let's
right.
Go.
The
Let's
A-team.
Go.
Oh, who are you?
Yeah.
Are you Hannibal or BA or?
I don't know.
I'm dating myself. Probably all the millennials listening to this are going like, "What in the world is the
what's
A-team?
A-team and why are we here?" But yeah. Anyway, if you've just joined us here, my name's Darren Cooper. I'm here with my brother Eric Cooper.
That's right.
Glad to be co-hosting this podcast and making this conversation happen. And it's just been an awesome journey. We are on episode 10 now.
That's correct.
It's moving along. This season 1 is flying by.
Just a few more episodes in season 1.
Just a few more, yeah, absolutely. And we've been going through Missional Marketplace, the book that you've written, kind of using that as our outline of our discussion to really bring these conversations forward. And last week, on the episode, we really moved into this Great Commission part of this conversation. As we land the plane on this season 1, it's all taking us out here on the Great Commission, and it's been awesome. And last week, as you kind of frame some of that up, for those that might be listening for the first time, let's hit some bullet points from that discussion. And just kind of frame this conversation for us moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's important because we talk a lot about faith and work here, and really the first two segments, the first two major segments of the podcast and of the book are kind of focused on that, the whole faith and work and the role of the marketplace in the kingdom. But ultimately, the Stone Table is a global missions organization. We're just coming at it from a marketplace seat on the bus, and that's why when we stepped into this last week, Darren, I went back and listened to what we recorded, and I get a little animated. I hope I didn't overstate it, but we're really getting into the crux and the heart of why Stone Table exists, right?
Yeah.
And so last week was
the passion button was hit, and you said, "Let's go."
That's right.
Yeah,
and so,
totally.
So, I mean, just real quick, I want to hit some bullet points from last week again because I think they're so important. They deserve to be repeated, right?
Yeah,
we really focused in on the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19, Jesus' last words to his disciples before he ascends into heaven: "Go and make disciples of all nations," or the original Greek is all ethnos, or people groups is how we translate that, right? Not nation states, but people groups. And there are, Darren, 3.2 billion unreached people around the world.
That's a lot of people.
Depending on how you count, again, upwards of 7,000 people groups or ethnos that are not reached with the gospel. We would define that as less than 2% Christian. About 1,500 of these people groups have literally no access at all to the gospel. No churches, no pastors, no missionaries, nothing, right? And we believe here at the Stone Table that this is the greatest injustice in the world today that really all other injustices flow out of, right?
For sure.
So this is not, and this is what's important. It goes back to that A-team, B-team mentality that's I think so often we have as marketplace believers, but this isn't just a calling for professional Christians and pastors and missionaries, right? Jesus said, "Go," and this is the responsibility of every Christ follower. We are heralds or ambassadors. We are declaring, we're the ones that are sent to declare the new life, the new creation, and the new kingdom of Jesus Christ that came into this world through his death and resurrection. And so, how are each of us embracing this great commission calling, even those of us with normal, everyday marketplace jobs and skills? That's the question I really want everybody to wrestle with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that really brings forward this idea of business as mission, right? We say that often around here. We get this idea of BAM. You might hear us say, absolutely, BAM, get it.
Right. I hope the compressors are working on microphones.
Yep. I'm sure they are. But yeah, so we talk often about business as mission and kind of what that is, and it's an idea that I think is new to some folks, right? Like it might be a challenge even in our own thing. I know it's been for me. So I think, as I often say, stories are some of the best ways that we can give this an understanding. Yeah. So as we talk about business as mission, as we talk about it in light of what we're seeing with the Great Commission, give us a story. Hit us with something that you've seen in your circle and your influence.
Yeah, I think this story may help us kind of shape some of the deeper dialogue that we want to have about business as mission and its strategy.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Darren, one of my frustrations working with unreached people groups and missionary friends who are working amongst unreached people groups is we can't tell a lot of their stories because so many of them work in sensitive places. They work in places that and we're not just being paranoid here. There are scenarios where not necessarily the Western missionaries as much, but the local indigenous believers that have come to faith. We can actually endanger their lives if we're not careful. And so there are so many stories that I wish I could just blab all over the internet, right? So you'll forgive us today. I'm going to bring some of the highlights out, but I really can't talk specifics today about locations and such. But there's a place in the Indian Ocean. This is a country that is 99.9% Muslim. And until recently, there was no known indigenous believers, right? So there might be, expats or foreign nationals that live on the island that are believers, right? So but there is no known believers amongst this people group or these people groups that are on this island. And traditional missionary methodologies, they don't work here. There's no Bible schools to teach in. There's no they don't offer missionary visas. You can't go, hey, I'm a missionary. I want to come tell people here in your country about Jesus. They're antagonistic towards evangelism. So this is a place that we have to be very, very strategic. But tourism is a huge industry. It's a huge economic industry in this part of the world, and learning basic business English for the locals is a huge economic opportunity. If they can learn basic business English, they can really move up the socioeconomic ladder. Yeah. So a group of business-minded missionaries started a business English school in this part of the world. Again, 99.9% Muslim. They started this English school to serve and add value to the locals. And I'll tell you, this wasn't only allowed, it was actually welcomed into the community.
I like that.
Now, I want to tell you, this is not a front. I think sometimes BAM gets a bad rap because of the kind of dishonest ways, and we're going to talk about that more in the next episode, but because of the dishonest ways that it can sometimes be utilized. But this is not a front. They are actually teaching, serving, building relationships, bettering the lives of the local community through this business English school. And what I love about it, Darren, is it's a financially viable model. That it economically works like a business would work. And they're using the school and the language education as a tool to build relationships and ultimately preach the gospel and start a church of local indigenous believers amongst this unreached people group. They're doing this by adding real economic business value to the local people that live there, which, as we've talked about in previous episodes, we know that business it's not about taking something from you. It's about adding value to your life through skills and abilities that I have, and we both come together with less and we leave with more, right? So this is the beauty of good Christ-centered healthy, holistic business, right?
Right.
So I've had the opportunity to visit the school there a handful of times. And of course, they do normal classroom study, but one of the things they do is they have discussion times where they'll get in groups and they'll practice their English as they're learning.
The way they work.
And one of the reasons this school is so viable is they love talking with native speakers. So it's one thing for you and I, if we were learning Spanish, to try to talk Spanish to each other.
Right.
It'd be another thing for us to talk, with an indigenous Spanish speaker.
Yeah.
So they love talking to Americans. And so I got to join some of these discussion groups, and it was just a blast. But they want to know about your life. They want to know about who you are and your experience, and you get to learn about them. But the missionary workers that are there, the BAM workers, have gotten very good at throwing discussion questions in the group that lead to fascinating spiritual conversations. And typically in the Muslim world, everybody thinks, it's so antagonistic towards the gospel. Most Muslims, they don't want you converting people to Jesus,
but they're open
they love having spiritual conversations. Everybody's having spiritual conversations in the Muslim world, right?
Yeah.
And so when we were there quite a few years ago now, a handful, it was kind of a tragic story, but in this part of the world, they still use very public and very dramatic punishment for certain crimes.
Wow.
And so some boys had been caught stealing in the local market.
Oh man.
And they still to this day, they publicly in the public square, they cut their hands off. So it was the talk of the community. These two boys who had one of their hands removed because of theft. I mean, think about that.
That's wow.
It's hardcore, right?
That is very hardcore.
But everyone in the community was talking about this, right? And so we used that as a discussion point. And one of the questions that was asked was, hey, if that was your son, would you be willing to take his place?
Wow.
And
wow.
It was funny that the conversation was thrown out. And this is a shame and honor culture. It's a law-based culture. I mean, if you screw up, like, you pay for your penalties, right?
Yeah.
And so watching, even in some of the mothers that were there, some of the fathers that were there, watching their brains start to turn around that question. And then I'll never forget, one woman said, no. She said, no, I would not, because we pay for the sins that we commit. And so then there was this opening for this conversation about, well, what about even God himself through Christ, who said, no, I will sacrifice so that you don't have to pay the penalty for your own sins, right?
That's good.
So even through, again, teaching English and discussing English, they open up real life relational conversations with local people about things that lead to gospel conversations. And it's been fascinating to watch.
That is so good. And you can see the journey, right? You can see how this stepping in, meeting the need in the community, right?
Yeah.
And yes, it is a business that has finances and things work in that way, but also this beautiful conversation, even probably the relationships that happen too. In those groups, right? To be able to have that relational conversation, getting to know each other through learning English together, and then all of a sudden there's all these rich and awesome questions that are thrown out like that. Man, I can see how that is beautiful in that place.
But think about how business has opened that up, right? And Darren, this, I'll tell you, man, I mean, this is kind of an aside, but when you sit across the table, I think so many times here in our Western culture and context, it's kind of us versus them. And we tend, even within our own country, it's like, what's wrong with the world? It's those people. And if those people would just be different, right? Then, but when you sit across the table from someone who has had a completely different religious experience, a completely different cultural and upbringing, and you realize the humanity and the shared imago Dei that we all carry, right? Something powerful begins to happen in that moment. And we know the gospel moves in relationship. We're going to talk about that in the last episode, the currency of the kingdom being relationships and how business and the marketplace foster those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's certainly my next question to you was why is business as mission work, right? But I think that story gives such it opens up that reality. Like even as you're telling me, I'm going, oh man, I see why it works.
Right.
I can see why. And you alluded to this isn't a front for the missionaries. Like they're literally there. And I think it's easy for us because, we talked about greed and kind of bad business a few episodes ago.
Right.
And it can be easily looked that way too.
There's
like,
no doubt.
it's just, you're just doing that so that you can get in and, propaganda or something, right? But it really is, no, we're here to serve and we're here to build relationships. And when you take that approach, beautiful things happen, including good business and including really good spiritual conversations. So we can see why BAM works.
It's huge, Darren, and I guess we have already alluded to this, but it really goes back to the first two pillars of this podcast and the first two pillars of the book, right? It works because the marketplace is part of God's redemption plan. It's a sacred thing, right?
Yeah.
When we embrace it the way God designed it, right?
Right.
We've seen the brokenness, we've seen the greed and power struggles and the way all those things can manifest in the marketplace, but that's not even good business, right? So this works because good business is not just economic, it's a holistic culture impacting, it's mutual service, it's value add.
Yeah.
And gospel wholeness doesn't equal economic vitality, but where the redeeming and renewing aspects of the gospel are at work, economic vitality is usually blossoming as well, right? And so that's why I don't want people to think we're getting into prosperity gospel here, right? Like come to Jesus and all of a sudden you'll be wealthy and everything will go right for you. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. But economic vitality, that's why these people welcome this into their community. And if we go there with the objective to serve them and to make a difference in their life, just like compassion relief, disaster relief, when we serve and add value to a community through business, it creates a platform for gospel proclamation, the planting of the church, and the wholeness and renewal, or shalom, if we want to go use a Jewish term, that the reality of the gospel can come to life. And I would say this, and this may be a little controversial, but I'll throw it out there. See, we don't just honor God and love our neighbor through acts of charity. Everybody understands how we honor God and love our neighbor through acts of charity.
Yep.
I would say we don't always, but we can honor God and love our neighbor through acts of commerce as well. And that's not just for this little, this country over on the Indian Ocean.
Right.
That's right in your own neighborhood, your own backyard. You
everywhere.
can honor God and love your neighbor through acts of commerce, just like you can love God and love your neighbor through acts of charity.
Well, when you shape it this way, right, I think we all understand the idea of like, okay, Jesus came, he washed the feet of his disciples, he served them well, he loved them well. You go, okay, if I'm following after Christ, this is what this looks like for me. Well, how do I do that, right? Well, it does. You can see it now. When you frame it this way, you can see how business is a service to those around you, and it really is following in the footsteps of Jesus that way, right? Yeah. Like we can serve through the work that we do, through the gifts and the skill set when we approach it that way.
Yeah.
And that's why we do talk about there is bad business, and there are people that do it for wrong reasons. There might even be missionaries that go and do this and the wrong reasons there too, right? But when we start from this place of servanthood, business as mission can change everything.
Yep.
And that's really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
And so as we continue this conversation, then we talk about business as mission, and we have some stories about business as mission. We kind of understand, but maybe give us some definitions, if you will, of what that really looks like in a practical way.
Yeah, because I think one of the problems we have is when I say BAM or when I say business as mission, 10 different people might hear that and define it a different way, right?
Correct.
So I do want to take some time on this podcast to define it the way we would define it here at the Stone Table.
This is what we mean when we say
when I say
kind of
business as mission,
Yeah.
this is what I'm talking about. And you've heard it through a story, but I'll tell you maybe just a little more black and white. I mean, the missions agency we work most closely with, Assemblies of God World Missions, they actually spun off a business as mission office a few years back because they saw just how important this was. But
saw the need.
Yeah, our friends at the BAM office, they work with over 100 different BAMs across the world, assisting with business plans, legal work, banking help, et cetera. And this is how they define it. And we've kind of adopted their definition because I just think it's clear, clean, and concise. This is how we define BAM. BAM is the intentional integration of business and ministry to create a sustainable presence of the kingdom of God in a particular community. The intentional integration of business and ministry to create a sustainable presence of the kingdom of God in a particular community, right? This isn't just business for economic sake.
Right.
Although we believe that loving our neighbor has economic outflows.
Sure.
Okay. Sure. This is integrating business with missional aims. So I would say, and our missions partners would often say, if we build a great profitable business in a UPG area that's helping people economically, but is not ultimately leading to conversations about Jesus and ultimately the planting of the church, we wouldn't consider this a successful BAM. Now, some people may argue with me, happy to have arguments with them.
Sure.
But that's important to us.
Right.
We believe in great business. We believe in the economic vitality that comes through the marketplace. I hope you've heard that over the first 9 episodes of this podcast. But if we're not using BAM to lead to conversations about Jesus and ultimately the planting of the church, then this is not a successful BAM for us. And we're not talking about bait and switch. We're not talking about faking business just so we can proselytize and sell Jesus like Amway, right?
Right.
We're talking about an evangelism and church planting strategy that uses genuine business as its mechanism.
That's huge. That's the big part there. And I think that's what we'll continue to reiterate in this is that when you do step into it from a servant's mentality, all of those other things kind of fall away. Right. And I love that definition because it's almost like you're going into this community and you're not just going to suck all the resources out of it, get what you can, and then leave. We are here to serve. Businesses might shift and change and look different over time, but we're invested in the community. And being invested in the community, that's what the BAM is all about. And then leading into those conversations, that has to be done.
Absolutely. A sustainable presence of the kingdom of God in a particular community.
That's good.
That's what the marketplace lets us do.
That's good. That's good. Well, I know you've told me a story before about this island that we've talked about, but let's revisit that.
Yeah.
And as we land the plane here on this episode, once you finish with this story, is it just such a beautiful story? Yeah,
I mean, let's go back to that place on the Indian Ocean, this business English school, and I'll just tell you, Darren, like many Muslim countries, the workers there they toil. And they scratch on dry ground for a long, long time. I mean, we talk about UPG work or unreached people group work a lot like the pharmaceutical industry. My brother-in-law David utilized this analogy in his book, which I thought was awesome. The first pill that you get literally costs a couple of cents to make, right? Like some cancer breakthrough or some new vaccine or whatever. But it doesn't literally cost a few cents. It cost billions of dollars, right? That led up to the creation of that first pill. That's a lot like the work that we do with a lot of our BAM missionaries, right? So a lot of these guys, a lot of these BAMs, a lot of these teams will spend years toiling on dry ground. That is the reality of unreached people group work. But we've had some breakthroughs in this location through this business English school, and I wish I could share all of the minutia with you. I got to see some of it with my own eyes, but for years they were there serving in the ways we talked about, and then one day, one of the locals came to Christ. I was actually lucky enough to be there for his baptism. In fact, back here on the wall behind me, I have that picture. I don't think you can see it. I think it's off camera.
I think it is off camera, but yeah.
It might have been one of the most moving moments of my entire life to watch this local indigenous. He was, at that time, he was the first known. Now, we don't understand the sovereignty of God, right? But he was the first known indigenous believer of this unreached people group. And I got to watch him be baptized.
It's beautiful.
And then a few months later, there was 2, then 3. Right now, there's 7 or 8 followers of Jesus from this unreached people group, and they are dealing, Darren, with massive persecution. We're talking about Book of Acts kind of stuff. We're talking about miraculous stories that you would not believe, the way God manifests himself. But God is planting the church among an unreached people group, one of those unreached people groups we talked about. He's planting the church amongst an unreached people group through a business. And that is what I want to leave us with today.
Yeah. And I love that because it is what we're talking about. And you can see and hear the stories of them just year after year staying faithful, year after year staying faithful. One happens, and then all of a sudden, 3, 5, it moves forward, and that's part of it, and that's beautiful. And I do think there's something really cool in that, to see that, yes, it takes a long time to work and to have those conversations and see maybe no fruit from those conversations. But what's beautiful is over time, you are planted more and more in the community.
Yep.
You're invested more and more in the community, and you can show people, no, I've been here for a long time and I've invested a lot.
That's right.
And there's something beautiful in that.
There is.
And so, yeah, man, that great stories. And again, I love when you tell those stories, even the little bits that you can, right?
Right.
Because it just gives us that idea that business as mission works. The work of our hand is important.
Yep.
And I love that.
Yep.
And so as we pivot from here into our missional moment, we have a good friend of yours, good friend of ours, right?
Yeah.
Dick Brogden, that we're going to be talking to today, who is he's one of those special guys, right?
Yeah.
You meet him, you talk to him, it's just like, man, I just want to hang out with you and hear more stories. But yeah, he's going to be sharing some good stuff with us today.
I mean, Dick is on the front lines of UPG work. He is his co-founder, global leader of the LiveDead movement, livedead.org, which is working with UPGs in countries all over the world. But Dick is a special guy, and he's a special friend to us. And so much of our missiology here at the Stone Table has been shaped by Dick's work. Yeah. So I don't want to get in the way of some of the things he has to share.
For sure.
But this is a special one for us today.
Yeah. So let's just get into it. Enjoy this week's missional moment.
Well, today we are in for a treat. We get the opportunity to talk to my good friend, Dick Brogden. Dick is the global leader of LiveDead. He is a missionary to Saudi Arabia and really is one of the foremost missions minds in the world today. And so I asked Dick when we spoke recently, why is a heart for global missions such a vital and important thing for Christians and the church today?
When we talk about missions, it's not a 2020 thing. Unreached people groups is not a last 3 decades thing. This heart for God to have people who worship him from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation is from Genesis to Revelation. It's all through the book. So David and Goliath, right? Why does David charge against the giant? Well, he gives us the answer, so that all the earth will know there is a God in Israel. Solomon dedicates the temple so that all the nations would honor and give majesty to the Lord. Old Testament, New Testament doesn't matter. all peoples will worship Jesus. Therefore, the operating question is, who doesn't do that yet? Because that's how it starts from Genesis. That's how it ends in Revelation. This is the whole passion. For God so loved the world, the cosmos, the created order, preach the gospel to every creature, make disciples of all nations, and on the scriptures go. So we have to be, if we're the people of God, we have to have missions heart.
One of my greatest concerns for Christians today and for the church today, especially here in the United States and in the West, is that we're losing our passion and our focus for global missions. We have all kinds of sideways energy being focused on culture wars and politics. And I fear that we are losing the Great Commission as our central focus. And I wanted to talk to Dick about this and get his perspective.
I think that the enemy is so clever at confusing the narrative. So now what is termed as hate and bigotry is what the Bible describes as love. Right. If we really are concerned about someone's eternal future, not just focused on the now, we want them to live forever in joy, justice, peace, truth. But what our modern times have done has told us, well, that's hateful. That's bigoted. To have an exclusionary view of how you have eternal life and live forever, don't share that because you're just hating on people. And it's so bizarre because it's absolutely the opposite. If we really love people, we will tell them how sins can be forgiven and how heaven can be gained. So in my spirit, I do agitate against that and say, wow, the enemy is really good at what he does. So therefore, let's not get upset at that. Let's just be really good at what we do. Right. Let's be so vibrant in our joyful proclamation of the gospel. Let's be so enthusiastic in our love for the Lord. Let's be so studious in our crossing of cultures and languages and barriers and gaps that we're very winsome. So I don't think the time is, for hand rubbing and sticking our head in the sand. Let's just be really good at doing what God told us to do.
Why is business as mission so important? As a missionary working in one of the hardest places around the globe, Dick has some very interesting perspective.
So the pragmatic view, well, you can't get into these countries or access these communities unless you have a credible platform. That's true. That's legitimate. So we do business and we do it well so that we can get visas and get into communities. But it goes beyond pragmatic to fruitful. What I mean by that is the normal person, if he had no job and no business, he might, share the gospel with his neighbor or the guy he buys fruit from or his landlord, but he's not actually built to generate new relationships all day long so that he can keep sharing the gospel so more people can get saved. So what happens if you're that dude, you share the gospel with the guy that owns your flat and who you buy fruit from, they reject it, now what? Right? Most people can't just generate new relational contacts out of thin air. They need a gym. They need a coffee house. They need a language center. They need a tourist company. They need a consulting corporation. They need something that propels them into life on life, face-to-face conversation with people. And you can't just sit in a coffee shop all day long and think people are going to drop in your lap and say, what must I do to be saved? You need a credible offering to get out in community that is renewable. That renewable content is really important. Why? Because so many people hear the gospel and reject it. So if you just don't have a way to meet new people, you're not going to see a lot of people saved. That's why business is not just pragmatic, but powerful, because it's continually propelling us into new conversations, relationships, opportunities where we can proclaim Christ and find those who are interested and then drill down in discipleship with them.
One of the most powerful aspects of business as mission is how even governments and authorities who are traditionally opposed to missionary efforts in their communities and cultures will open their arms wide to entrepreneurial and economic development efforts.
So we live in Jeddah, which is on the west coast of Saudi Arabia. It's the port city for Mecca. We're 45 minutes from Mecca. And Jeddah is a bit of an international city because through the centuries and decades, Arabs, Indians, Asians, Africans have come on pilgrimage and stayed. So Jeddah is a very friendly city. On top of that, Saudi Arabia through the last couple of years has really changed. It has been an economy that has been dependent on oil. And so the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, realizes, along with King Salman, his father, that the country has to diversify. If they're only oil dependent and they don't have multiple streams of revenue, the country with its exploding population's in a lot of trouble. Therefore, they're taking concrete steps to open up the country. They're opening it up for tourism, which gives us a great opportunity, because as people who want to do legitimate business, we can also come to the government and say, you know what, we get it. You need a diversified economy. You want to open up for the tourist sector. We have access to a demographic of tourists that nobody else does. We're connected to thousands of churches and university groups that are Christian. You have a perspective Mount Sinai right here. Moses was here. Paul was here. Why not let us help you open up your country where a bunch of your vendors, whether in camping or restaurants or hotels, can make money. We'll bring in Christian tourists. We'll bring in Christian university students. We'll bring in churches. We'll have a positive cultural experience. They'll learn about Islam. We'll take them to Mount Sinai. They'll see the split rock of Moses, twinkle their toes in the Red Sea where they came across. We can bless the country. We can bring in revenue. We can create jobs, and we can create gospel exposure, awareness. And our big heart on this is, the Lord would just move on men and women to give their life to come join us and to make disciples amongst Saudis, Arabs, those from the Gulf, the Arab world, the unreached world, and beyond.
If you're interested in LiveDead and how you might be able to get involved, you can visit livedead.org. Huge thanks to my friend Dick Brogden for his time today and his wisdom today. And I just want to encourage you, this interview was so good, we're going to extend it into next episode as well. So make sure you come back for episode 11 and catch part 2 of our missional moment with Dick Brogden.
We told you that you were going to enjoy that conversation, and it was a good one, man. Dick Brogden, always bringing truth, always bringing inspiration.
When I'm with Dick, I feel challenged more than I've ever been challenged in my life. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant.
Yes,
so,
that's a good way of putting it. Good way of putting it. So we hope that you enjoyed that missional moment. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast, to download, to like, to share with your friends and your family, and maybe even your enemies. It's fine. Just send it over.
Send them to anyone.
It'll be great. It'll be great. But just one thing we always want to encourage you to do, if you could rate and review this podcast, that is huge for us. It just helps spread the word, kind of establishes this podcast as something that's new and upcoming. And so please take a minute to do that right now. That would be awesome.
On whatever platform you listen to your podcast on, right? Go and rate it, write reviews, write comments. If this is inspired or ministered to you in some way, it's just a huge help to us. And then, of course, I always feel somewhat self-promoting here, Darren, but Missional Marketplace is available. You can get that on Amazon. You can get it at our website, thestonetable.org. You can go right to Amazon. There's a paperback. There is a Kindle version, and there's even an audiobook version. I'd be happy to read this to you, put your kids to bed at night, whatever it takes to get your kids to fall asleep. Or you can find that also at Eric Cooper, Eric with a K, ericcooper.me. With Dick Brogden as well, livedead.org. Encourage you to go check that out. If the Lord's working on you, if the Lord is stirring you, if you have a missional pull in your life in any way, shape, or form, just really would encourage you to connect with our friends at LiveDead. They are doing some incredible work, hard work. But if we want to see the Great Commission fulfilled in our lifetime, it's going to take people who are willing to give themselves in those kinds of environments. And then, next week, Darren, I think this business as mission discussion is it's the crux of who we are and what we're doing, right? So, we're going to actually continue this next week. We're going to talk more about BAM and business as mission next week. So we hope you'll come back and join us.
For sure. Yeah. So join us next week for another Missional Marketplace podcast. Until then, go out and accelerate the Great Commission through the marketplace.
Do it.
The work of your hand, because it is important. And we will see you next week.
God bless.